Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the 12th season of AViD, Authors Visiting in Des Moines, presented by the Des Moines Public Library. I'm Dory Briles, the new director of the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. The foundation is proud to support a program that celebrates authors, writing, and all of us who love to read. The nonprofit foundation advocates for and provides financial support to the library beyond what our tax dollars and tight city budgets can provide. We raise money that helps make possible library programs like AViD, the summer reading program for children and teens, and the Iowa Author Awards. Thank you to the contributors who have made tonight's program possible. We would like to give special recognition and thanks to Humanities Iowa, Douglas and Deborah West, Nationwide Insurance Companies, Wells Fargo Corporation, Iowa Public Radio, Principal Financial Group, and the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, who many members are here this evening. Thank you. If you love AViD, please thank our generous sponsors and consider making your donation to the Library Foundation to ensure that we have authors visiting Des Moines for many years to come. We have donation envelopes like this out at the Library Foundation table. So please take one on your way out this evening. And please join me now in a round of applause for Jan Kaiser, who's in the back of the room. Jan is our marketing manager for the library. She and her staff do incredible work each and every day to support AViD and the other library programs. At their table this evening, when you came in, you can get these great-looking AViD totes, and they're on sale for only $10. And I know I've been on the job now 11 days. This has become my new briefcase, and I know it holds at least 40 pounds, so they're very sturdy. At the end of the program, the bookstore, John will be selling Will Haygood's books on the table to your right, and Mr. Haygood will be happy to autograph the books at the table at the north door in the Brenton Gallery Cafe. There will also be refreshments that are provided by the foundation and the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Inside your program is an evaluation form. And if you have a question for Mr. Haygood, at the bottom of the form, please print out your question, and we will be collecting these from the audience during the Q&A session after his presentation. Also, please take a few minutes to fill out the entire form. If you have authors you would like to recommend, be sure to list them. If you would like to receive news about upcoming events, please give us your email address. And you can drop these forms at the foundation's table where a big sign that says evaluations. At this time, please make sure all your electronic devices are turned off. And now to our program. It is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Angie Chapman. Angie is a former Library Foundation board member. She is a college professor, a writer, an avid reader, and also a model. Angie holds an MFA in creative writing from Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina, and an MBA from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Angie co-chairs the Arts and Letters Committee of the local chapter of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Ladies and gentlemen, Angie Chapman.
Most people know the 3 C's of diamonds: carat, cut, and clarity. I've discovered that to be a quality writer, there are also 3 C's. You need to have an innate curiosity, courage, and compassion. As a national reporter with the Washington Post, Will Haygood has the proverbial nose for a good story. But it's his curiosity that drives him to find the story behind the story. One of my personal favorite Haygoods is a series about Eugene Allen. You probably haven't heard of Mr. Allen. He was a butler in the White House. He served 8 presidents, from Truman to Reagan. He never missed a day of work. He was working when President Kennedy was assassinated. Mrs. Kennedy invited him to the funeral, but he stayed behind to serve the repast. But when Barack Obama was inaugurated president, Eugene Allen, in gloves and a fedora, sat and witnessed history, this time from a front row seat instead of through the kitchen door. Here was a man who in 1952 couldn't use a public bathroom if he crossed the Potomac River into Virginia. But he was in the center of power for the desegregation of public schools, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Eugene Allen served LBJ milk to calm his stomach during the Vietnam War. Isn't that a great story? It would make a great movie, wouldn't it? Hollywood agrees with you. According to Variety magazine, Lee Daniels, who was nominated for an Oscar for the movie Precious, is slated to direct Forrest Whitaker as Eugene Allen, Oprah Winfrey as his wife Helene, and Jane Fonda as Nancy Reagan, based on Will Haygood's articles in the Washington Post. With Eugene Allen's life as the vehicle, Will Haygood gives the reader a unique perspective on race relations in America. Throughout the series of articles, Haygood included information about history and the help. It's that kind of exceptional journalistic talent and courage that has won Will awards from the New England Associated Press and the National Association of Black Journalists. Mr. Haygood has also been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. After reading the Allen pieces, and you can see them online, it's not surprising that Will's books are biographies of other pivotal men in history, albeit better-known ones. There is his book, The King of Cats, The Life and Times of Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., In Black and White, The Life of Sammy Davis, Jr., and his most recent book, Sweet Thunder, The Life and Times of Sugar Ray Robinson. It's his compassion for these complicated characters and their place in American history that makes these stories so fascinating. The Guggenheim Foundation agrees with me. Will was awarded a fellowship by that foundation last year, and those are hard to get. As a teacher myself, the ultimate act of compassion is to train other writers in the craft. I met Mr. Haygood last summer at the Hurston Wright Writers Conference on Howard University's campus. I was in the fiction workshop. Will taught the nonfiction class. He was the only man among a dozen females. They called themselves Haygood's Lionesses. Speaking of lionesses, I'd like to thank the Des Moines Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta for co-sponsoring this event. Delta Sigma Theta is a 99-year-old community service organization. We will celebrate our 100th anniversary next year in Washington, D.C., where we were founded. If you see a smart, talented, hardworking, dedicated, beautiful woman, she's probably is a Delta, or as my mother used to say, she will be a Delta, or she wants to be a Delta. Would my fellow sorors of Delta Sigma Theta please stand? On behalf of the Des Moines Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, I'd like to welcome Will Haygood to Des Moines. And before he approaches the stage, he has a treat for us. Watch carefully on screen.
Come on, Josh, your turn.
All right. Someday I'll have me a chauffeur and a block-long limousine, EO11. EO11. Someday I'll have me a penthouse, stacks and stacks of folding green. EO11. EO11. It's all a state of mind, whether or not you find that place down there or heaven. In the meantime, EO, EO, EO11, EO11, EO11. It is all a state of mind, whether or not you find that place down there or heaven. But in the meantime, EO, EO11, EO11. Do-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dow. Vince Arenio! How are you?
Hello. When the movie that Angie mentioned was announced, in the aftermath, I went to my hometown in Columbus, Ohio, for a reading event. And I walked out on the stage and looked around, and I spotted the two ladies who turned me down for the high school prom. I demanded that they stand up. I wanted to know how life was going for them. My mother was sitting in the front row and said, "Don't do that." It's very nice to be here in Iowa. I had a wonderful little tour of the city yesterday. Jan took me around and showed me some beautiful spots and some monuments in the state capitol, and it was really nice. I've been here a couple times as a journalist. Matter of fact, my first book, it's a book about a trip down the Mississippi River, brought me to Iowa, and I was in Keokuk a long time ago. Hard to find that book, but there are a couple readers, bless their hearts, who have that book here, tonight, and I was, there it is, Two on the River. Thank you, and I was, me and Stan Grossfeld, who takes great photographs, we were traveling on the river, and at one point, we ran out of money. We had to have money wired to us. So in Keokuk, I might have borrowed money off of somebody, and if anybody's here who I owe money to, see me out in the hallway after. Actually, I'm here tonight, though, because of Iowa's own version of Sweet Thunder, and that would be Angie Chapman. she told me that she and the Deltas wanted me to come, and so I'm smart enough not to say no to a Delta, and thus here I am. I'm going to read just little short snippets from my Sammy Davis book. When you write books about life figures, sort of bigger than life figures, my most recent books have been about these big figures. The first thing a biographer does is you look for the obituaries of your subject's family, of his or her parents. And so I, in writing about Sammy Davis Jr., I wanted to get the obits of his mother and his father, and I found the obituary of his father, Sammy Davis Sr., and couldn't find the obituary of his mother, Elvira. And I said to myself, well, she probably died in some small town, someplace, and nobody made the connection, and it wasn't written about. And so I looked harder and harder and harder, and I still couldn't find it. And then I knew somebody up in New York, and I called them, and I said, hey, Charlie, I cannot find the obituary of Sammy Davis's mother, Elvira. And he said, well, there's a good reason. She's still alive. And I said, no, not his daughter, his mother, Sammy Davis's mother. And he said, saw her in church Sunday. So I immediately call her and introduce myself to her and explain to her that I'm in the process of writing a book about her son and that I'd love to come to New York City to interview her. The reason I became fascinated in Sammy Davis's life, when I was little, there were very few African Americans on television. You know, there was Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Lena Horne, Sammy Davis Jr. And he used to do a whole lot of quick draws, he'd be on shows like The Wild Wild West, The Big Valley, and I used to watch those shows with my mom when I was a little kid. And if you were black in your neighborhood in the 60s, when somebody black came on TV, your parents would rush to the door and say, hurry up and come in the house, hurry up. Sammy Davis is on TV. Harry Belafonte is on TV. It was a jolt of cultural pride. And so I used to walk around the house, drawing a gun like, wow, like, hey, I'm Sammy Davis Jr. And so one day I came to write a book about Sammy Davis Jr. He was a very complicated character, but in his own way, very much a genius. There's no doubt about that. But what I'm going to read is about my meeting Sammy Davis's mother. I went to New York and met her. Anyway, here goes. I won't say Sammy Davis's mother warms up to me, but after a while, she seems to appreciate my company. I tell her my mother's own name is Elvira. She smiles a tight smile. We talk of her life, her youth. She danced in chorus lines at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. She wanted to sing but didn't have the lungs, only the dream. After her show business career ended, she did some dressmaking. Then she moved to Atlantic City and became a barmaid. When Frank Sinatra was in Atlantic City, he'd come over to the bar with his entourage, just to shoot the breeze with Sammy's mama. I tell her I'll be returning to New York City in a month. I ask if I can see her again. She says yes. Then she says she hardly ever gets out. I ask her if there's anything special she would like to do the next time I'm in New York. Before she can answer, I suggest a theatrical play. Have you seen Ragtime? She asks. I have not. Back home, I call and secure 2 tickets to see the play. I am taking Sammy Davis's mother to Broadway. I feel giddy and a little nervous. There she is, 3 weeks later in the lobby of her apartment building as I roll up in a taxi. She is wearing black and gold lame. She has on long loopy earrings, jewelry on both wrists. There are rings on the fingers of both hands. There is a necklace around her throat, truly bejeweled. Well, her Sammy loved jewelry, wore too much of it, in fact. Inside the theater, she looks glittery, leaning on the cane with one hand and on me with the other. We reach the elevator to go downstairs to a small area where theater goers can get something to drink or have some fruit. The elevator is out of order. Sammy Davis's mother shoots me a cold look. You should have called ahead and found out about this, she says. Her voice is edgy. I feel ashamed of myself for not having ESP. I hustle through the crowd, wanting to find the stairs and the shortest possible route for me to walk her to them. With her out of my sight, I fret. I have the mother of Sammy Davis Jr. with me. If something happens to her, a fall, a broken hip, I'll end up in the New York tabloids. Mother of Sammy Davis, accompanied by reporter, injured at theater. I could see the headlines. I find the stairway and rush back to her. Once we are at the stairs, ready to walk down, she turns to me and says, "You really should have taken care of this." My stomach tightens. I don't appreciate this at all. Walking down the steps, holding her for dear life, I feel as if I am taking her off of Mount Everest. We reach the bottom. I lead her to a seat. She has a drink, some slices of fruit. She finally looks relaxed. I sit looking at her. I wonder what dreams of her vanished in her own life. Sammy would fly her to his nightclub and Broadway openings, but those who saw them together have told me there was little intimacy. He'd have to be reminded to call her on Mother's Day. Halfway through the opening act of Ragtime, I look over at Elvira Davis. She has fallen asleep. When the curtain closes at the end of the first act, the applause awakens her and she turns to me and says, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" At play's end, she says she would like to meet Brian Stokes Mitchell, star of Ragtime. But she also says she hates the parents of stars who use their last name as clout to get their way. Outside, we look at the long line at the stage door. We will never, ever get to see Brian Stokes Mitchell. Any fool can see that. In a flash, Elvira Davis raises her cane above her head and starts making her way up along the line. The cane pokes a man in his rear end. People look at me. I squint, look away. "Move, please," Elvira Davis says. "I'm Sammy Davis's mother. Please move. I'm the mother of Sammy Davis Jr. Move." Just inside the stage door, she leans down into a glass booth to tell the attendant who she is. "Tell Brian Stokes Mitchell I want to see him. I'm Sammy Davis's mother." It sounds like a military order. Mere minutes later, there we are, standing in the dressing room of Brian Stokes Mitchell, the star. Mitchell leans over and hugs Elvira Davis, hugs her quite reverently. It is touching. "This is Earl," she says, turning to me. introducing me to Mitchell. "Hi, Earl," the great Brian Stokes Mitchell says. "Hi," I say, too afraid to simply correct the mother of the great Sammy Davis Jr. We ride a taxi back to her apartment building. Motherhood is a mystery, maybe the greatest written and unwritten mystery of our times. Sammy Davis Jr. lived his life wondering if his mother truly loved him. She walks inside. Her Sammy is holding her up. The cane she is holding on to belonged to him. "Tell your mother, Elvira, I said hello," she says, talking of my own mother. The comment surprises me. Elvira Davis died 3 months ago. She was 95. Hers was a long life. She had lived through the Great Depression and 2 world wars. She had endured the fame that swallowed up her only son, not to mention the river that roiled between them. Thank you. This is a little bit from my Sugar Ray Robinson book, and yes, it is a book about a sports figure spinning around America, but it's really a book about the 1950s. It's a book about style and culture and New York and his nightclub. It really isn't a sports book. I've been very careful to tell people that it's a book about Sugar Ray and 3 of his closest friends, Lena Horne, Miles Davis, and Langston Hughes. And so they're all major characters in this book. And there's a little section here about sepia beauty. Sugar Ray was in love with black beauty. And I'm going to read just a couple paragraphs, and it's kind of a tribute to the deltas in the room, because it's about beautiful black women in Sugar Ray's orbit. They were beautiful, and they were well practiced at turning at just the right moment toward the flash bulbs of the camera. It was the beginning of the 1950s when they started to get noticed. Madison Avenue ignored them, but they strutted on the pages of Negro publications, and also the occasional photo display in special editions of Life and Holiday magazines. Many were the offspring of strong-willed mothers who encouraged them to have an appreciation of art and music and their own beauty. They moved from stage to cabaret setting, taking on an occasional role in film. Lena Horne was their maiden voyager, but neither Eartha Kitt nor Dorothy Dandridge, Marva Lewis, nor Hazel Scott, nor Sugar Ray's wife Edna Mae Robinson felt intimidated by the glow that Horne had cast. Like Horne, all were convinced of their individual sensuality, beauty, and talent. They cast quite a different spell from the darkly hued women, Hattie McDaniel, Butterfly, McQueen, Louise Beavers, who had been featured in American cinema, often in the role of maid a decade earlier. This new group aimed to etch a different persona, and they did. Edna Mae Robinson, Sugar Ray's wife, had never reached the higher levels of show business. The world of solo engagements had eluded her. But now, in 1958, with her own husband entering the world of show business, she had a kindred spirit in Sugar Ray. She could travel with him, watch him enter her show business world, enjoy it all over again. For Sugar Ray, this would be the kind of work that could remind him of his childhood dreams when he had paraded outside Broadway theaters just staring. And it could also be the very thing to take him away from the bloody business that had consumed him for so much of his life. Now I believe we'll have a conversation. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's time for your questions.
Okay.
Right, you're supposed to write your question down on the form that's in your book, and then our wonderful intern will collect them and bring them up here so that we make sure that everybody hears them. And while we're waiting for you to do that, I have my own question. So, Will, how did you find Mr. Allen? How did you find that story, since that's the new movie that's going to come out?
Is this on? Is this on?
Push it up.
Now it's on. I was covering the campaign of then Senator Obama, and I was on the road with his campaign back in 2008, and I was in North Carolina at one of his events, and afterwards I walked outside of the auditorium, and I noticed 3 young ladies, and they happened to be white, and they were crying. And I asked them if there was anything I could do. And they, all 3 of them said that because they supported then Senator Obama, their fathers had stopped talking to them. And they were quite crushed. And it was at that moment that I said to myself, Obama's going to win. I mean, that was just an example of what was going on in the country. And so I raced back to my newsroom and said I wanted to find somebody who lived through the era of segregation, who might be on the verge of witnessing history, and just to see what that would be about. And so I found Mr. Allen. He and his wife, they'd never been written about. Worked at the White House for 35 years. First Lady Nancy Reagan, bless her heart, invited him to dance at a state dinner, to be a guest at a state dinner. He was the first and only butler in history who was an official guest of a state dinner. And so I interviewed him and his wife. And on Sunday, we at the Washington Post sent a photographer to take a picture of he and his wife at their home. And on Monday, they both went to bed. The day before the election, he woke up and his wife didn't. She died in her sleep. And so he went to vote alone, and I wrote this big story, and so it got a lot of attention, and now his wife is going to be played by Mrs. Winfrey. So it's really quite something.
That's not the first story that's been optioned for a movie. Can you, one of these books, or has it been 2 books?
Yes, my Denzel Washington bought the movie rights to my Sammy Davis book, but that hasn't been made in the option lapse. But then there's another person who just optioned that book. And the people who made Moneyball, the Brad Pitt movie, Rachel Horowitz, the executive producer of Moneyball, has just bought the rights to my Sugar Ray Robinson book. So
Congratulations.
thank you.
We are really looking forward to seeing those.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have one question. You know, how did you get into journalism in the first place? I love this story. Right?
Yeah.
Especially, you're going to talk about being at the store, right?
Yeah. Okay. I came out of college, majored in urban planning, went to Miami of Ohio, and after I graduated, went to New York and ended up getting a job in the executive training program at Macy's department store. My mother back in Columbus was telling people, my boy's running Macy's. After a year, I was fired, so Macy's ran me out. I mean, it's funny. when you are about to get fired, you really dig deep and try to convince your supervisor, you're making a terrible mistake. I mean,
That's never happened to me.
yeah, don't fire me, Janet. I have plans for the store. I have big plans. And she said, no, Will, half the time you're in the stockroom reading books. And so I had to, refocus my life. And I went back to Columbus. It's heartbreaking to go back home after you've left home with your suitcases, and you've flown to New York. I'm going to make it. I'm going to New York, Now you're back home, and your sisters are looking at you saying, going back upstairs. We told you never should have went to New York City in the first place. We don't have no family in New York City, no cousin, no nothing. Mama worried about you sick every day you were gone. We don't know why you went to New York City.
And did you see those women who wouldn't go to the prom with you too?
No, but when I went back for one of my books, it was in the window of Macy's. So that's the way to go back.
Whoa. Yes. Amen. Cool. Okay. We have a question here about how do you even get permission to write a book about a celebrity like Sammy Davis or Sugar Ray?
Yeah, well, you really just do it. It's a free country. It's not Russia. And I'm trained as a journalist. And so, say like if somebody doesn't want to talk to me, like, one of Sammy's cousins or somebody like that doesn't want to talk to me, I used to be hurt about those kind of things, but I interviewed probably 250 people for my Sammy Davis book, and I moved out to LA for a whole year. I spent 5 years on the book, and so you just knock on doors and make phone calls, and those interviews start to mount up. Like Shirley Rhodes, who just recently passed away, she was Sammy's road manager for 30 years, and she sort of brought me into Sammy's world, and she was just beautiful and wonderful. And then one person leads to another person, leads to another person, and so that's how it gets done.
Yeah, speaking about Sammy's world, we have a question here that says, can you tell us any stories from the book about Sammy when he was with his uncles in vaudeville?
Yeah, who asked that question? Can you identify yourself? Who? Okay. Thank you for asking that, because that is my favorite part of the book. Will Maston and Sammy Davis, they were the two uncles. Will Maston liked to think of himself as Sammy's uncle, but they went on the road as the Will Maston Trio. And when I started doing the book, I just became obsessed with Will Maston. He was a vaudevillain, born about 5 years after the end of slavery. He lived to be 100 years old. He was a genius, and a lot of people think that the Rat Pack and Frank Sinatra and created Sammy and made Sammy. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sammy Davis was raised by two very formidable black men who had to go against the vaudevillian theater owners who didn't know what to do with this act. And little Sammy really kept the act going. He was a powerful force and just an astonishing talent. And Frank Sinatra and other people hinted to Sammy, let these two old cats go, man, and go solo. And Sammy, all the way up until 1959, said, nope, they raised me, I love them, I know they're getting slower on stage, but they mean everything to me. And he kept them on the road with him. And it's a very touching touching story, and it was one of the joys of doing the book. Will Maston was an unsung figure, and I wrote a lot about him in my Sammy book.
You mentioned that it took you 5 years of research. Is that typical? I mean, I have a question here. It says, how long does it take to publish a book from your idea when you first choose the subject to finish so that we could hold it, and read it?
Yeah. Sammy took 5 years. My Adam Clayton Powell took, again, 5 years. The Sugar Ray Robinson took 4 years. So, they're generally 4 to 5 year projects. It's a lot of travel, and I want to do it right. Sort of like what Lionel Hampton said about somebody who wrote a song, and Lionel Hampton said, well, I don't think anybody else is ever going to attempt to do that because he closed the door on that song. And so I kind of go at it with the attitude that I sort of want to close the door on the subject, so I just exhaust myself at it.
Okay, you left out the Mississippi River book, and so we have a question here about talking about your research for that first book about the Mississippi River when you were in Keokuk.
Yeah, that was just a trip that editor, actually it was Stan Grossfeld, who's a photographer, a great photographer. He came up with the idea to take a trip down the Mississippi River on the 150th anniversary of Mark Twain's birth. And so we had a raft literally built in Hannibal. And so we took the trip down the Mississippi River at last.
Rode on a raft.
Yep, we rode on a raft. The raft.
Open to the elements.
Yep, open to the elements. Open to the elements.
And how much did they pay you for this?
Yeah, not enough. It was scary. We got in a storm one time just below St. Louis where the river opens wide. And we knew we were going to drown, and so we both tied ropes to each other and said, hold on, hold on, hold on. And somebody from the bank saw us, and they called in the fire department, and there were fire trucks waiting on the banks and to rescue us. I mean, it was just amazing. Some of it.
How old were you?
Yeah.
This
was my first
young.
book.
Right.
This is my first book. But some of it was the fault of the Corps of Engineers, because we did some research before we set out, and we got the maps, the booklets that the Corps of Engineers that they published, and it would say there's a little town here and there's a little town there. Well, the river had shoved those towns 2 miles up, and we would be on the banks like at 9 o'clock at night, and we would be starving because we lost our food on the river. And Stan would say, hey man, why don't you walk into town and get some food while I stay here and watch my camera equipment? And I said, a black man walking through the woods alone at 10 o'clock at night? I don't think so. I'll watch the cameras. You hoof it into town and get the food. I mean, now this was in 1988. That's just 23 years after the 1965 Civil Rights Act, And all that stuff is going through my mind. So Stan went into town. I'll watch the cameras. Go get the food, Stan. He did. Bless his heart. He's a dear friend of mine.
So the 1950s is not your era, right?
No.
So why did you pick these individuals? What do they have in common, and how do they connect to you as the writer? Because it's not by accident that you picked them.
No. That's a great question. I mean, I just, for some reason, fell in love as a historian, with the pre-civil rights era in America, and how these people could use their genius in trying to cross over. I mean, and so Sammy forced his acceptance by white people. Sugar Ray Robinson did the same thing, and so did Adam Clayton Powell. I mean, they defeated segregation, I mean, in their own way. And there was just something, you know, stylish about Harlem and about night clubbing and about dressing and about photographs of
And don't
Lena
forget your
Horne.
uncle.
Pardon?
Don't forget your uncle. Remember that story about your uncle
My uncle,
in Columbus?
who was a boxer?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, and
I'm trying to cue you here.
Yeah.
Your uncle.
I had an uncle. I mean, this goes to the Sugar Ray Robinson book. Who was a Golden Gloves boxer, and it was the first time I ever seen my grandmother cry because she was listening to her son, my uncle, on the radio, and he was getting beat up badly, and I was just crushed. And I said, "Oh, mother, don't cry. Mother, don't cry. Mother, don't cry." And so I became fascinated to why people go into a boxing ring and get hit. I just became fascinated by that. And in the 8th grade, I was at Thompson's Recreation Center, and only time in my life I put on boxing gloves and a headgear, and I got hit in the face. And the pain went down my back, down my 2 legs, in my feet, and then back up the front of my body. And on some mornings, I still feel that pain. And I said, I will never box in my life, but it was fascinating studying the craft and the people who do.
So we have a question here. It says, if it takes you 5 years to research a book, how do you support yourself? Does the Post give you time off to do that, or do you just wake up at 5 in the morning every day and write on it?
Yeah. Who asked that question? I mean, who asked that question? Please identify yourself. Okay, you don't want to? Okay. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, that is a good, very good question, because every time I go on a leave, my mother says, "Is your job still going to be there? How many copies is that book selling?" And so, like right now, I'm on a leave of absence because I'm working on another book. And so my newspaper, very kind enough to give me an unpaid leave of absence. And then last year I was lucky enough to get a Guggenheim Fellowship. But it is an ordeal to sacrifice and commit time to writing these big books. It is.
But it helps when you get the movie options, because when we say movie options, that's money, right?
Yeah, well, yes. But the movie option really doesn't, I mean, it's not much money. I mean, I could have taken those 2 ladies out who turned me down for the high school prom to a great dinner with the movie option money, but now I look, not a lot more. But if the movie gets made, and then things will get better. Yeah, things will get better.
Let's hope on that. Besides the interviews you've conducted, what other kind of research do you do for 5 years to write these biographies?
Yeah, here's a great story. Sammy Davis, many of you know, I'm sure, he had one eye. He got in a car accident. He was in a Cadillac, got in a car accident in 1954.
And didn't Cadillac redesign their cars so that wouldn't happen again?
Yeah. Angie, you're amazing. Yeah, she's red. Yeah. You got it. And San Bernardino. So I was living in L.A. working on the book, and I was driving to Las Vegas to interview somebody, and I saw the sign, San Bernardino, 30 miles east. And I said, what the heck? I might as well drive over there just to take a look visually at the hospital. And so I walk into the lobby of the hospital, and there are about 2 or 3 ladies sitting behind a desk, and I say, hi, I'm Will Haygood, and I'm working on a book about Sammy Davis Jr., and I know this was the hospital he was brought to way back in 1954, and I'm looking for anybody who miraculously might still be on staff from then. Were any of you ladies here? And they all looked at me and said, no, heavens no, how old do you think we are? Heavens no. I said, excuse me, but, whoa. So I turned around to leave, and one of the ladies said, but wait a minute, honey, wait a minute. And she said, look, there's a nurse here, Jackie, I think Sloan, and let me call her because she worked here for like 47 years. So she called her and said, Jackie, there's a gentleman here. I want to put him on the phone. And she said, and so she handed me the phone, and I said, hi, ma'am. My name is Will Haygood. I'm working on a book about Sammy Davis Jr. because his car wreck was right up the road back in 1954. He was brought to this hospital, and she said, I was the admitting nurse that night. And she said, get back in your car and go out to the mountain and go east for 10 miles, and you'll see a housing development, and that's where I live, and I'll be at the gate waiting on you. So I go, and she was wonderful. And I said, can you tell me anything about the doctor, Dr. Leatherman, who did the, I think that's his name, I've got it in the book, who did the eye surgery? And she said, from a very well-known family, he just really tried hard to save Sammy Davis's eye, very capable doctor, and she said, but heck, why don't you ask him yourself? And I said, excuse me? She said, yeah, he lives right up the road. And so I hopped in my car and sped up the road, and she had called him, and he was out in front of his lawn waiting on me. He was in his 90s then. You know, those are the things that a biographer does, and you never know until you get out there and look and search. You know, you can't write a book, a big book, you know, from the internet, Wikipedia, all this mess. You just can't. You have shoe leather. It is shoe leather. You have to get out there. I tell students, don't be sitting here making phone calls trying to get somebody to give you some information. You have to get to know people. Mr. and Mrs. Allen, the butler and his wife, when I first went there, they were nervous. They had never been interviewed, and they were watching The Price is Right on TV. And they turned to me and they said, we're going to talk to you, but we got to watch The Price is Right first. I'm sorry. Just came on at 11 o'clock, doesn't go off till 11:30. And then my husband watches the rerun. And so I said, hey, that's fine. I love that show. You know, and I'm sitting there with him saying, don't bet on that. Don't why do you do that, Mr. Allen?
So that explains why it takes 5 years, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly. That was a roundabout way.
So you said you're on leave from the Washington Post, working on your next book. Come on, tell us what it is.
I'm working on a book about the confirmation process of Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, which took place in 1967. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's just amazing. Lawyer. There you go, yeah.
So all of these people, you know, once you do all this research, they're all very three-dimensional. They're complex. What is something that you found out that you didn't like about them? Because, you know, these are really heroes, you know.
Yeah.
What was the flaws? What did you discover that's like, wow, ick?
It was probably Sammy Davis Jr. And, I mean, I would say, but let me preface that by saying there was something gigantic about Sammy that I did learn that I didn't know that made me very proud of him. I interviewed Harry Belafonte. You know, and it's amazing when you meet somebody, you know, famous and bigger than life. So I always like to get there early. And so Mr. Belafonte's office is in New York City. And I was kind of walking toward his office, and say our appointment was at noon, and I'm walking toward his office, and I'm slowing up because, you know, I'm really early it's about 11:30, and then all of a sudden this force walks by, and I look up, and I say, wow, that's Harry Belafonte. God damn, whoa, man, gee whiz, Harry Belafonte just walked by me, and I said, heck, he's going to his office to wait on me so I can interview him. And I'm in his office, and I'm talking to him, and he opened my eyes. He was telling me about Sammy Davis sending money to Selma, Alabama when the civil rights marchers were arrested, and they needed bail money. And so he said, make sure that you put that in your book. Nobody knows about that. It's a great story. Sammy bailed a lot of the marchers out of jail. You know, and it was just amazing. And I think some of this was because he was always confused about the depth of his mother's love. And that can haunt a child. It just can. I mean, most mothers would go into the jaws of a lion to get their child. But Sammy's mother gave him up to his father. She said, you take him. And I think he was forever trying too hard to be a loyal friend to Frank Sinatra. He was trying too hard to make Jerry Lewis laugh. He was trying too hard to be a soul brother in the 60s. I mean, and, you know, psychologically, I think a lot of that came from the fact that, you know, he often wondered about
whether
his
he was loved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, that's one of the questions here. It says you spoke of the importance of mothers. Please share with us the most important memory of your own mother when you were growing up and becoming a writer.
Yeah. My mother was a young single mother, you know, with 5 kids, and so she moved in with her grandparents. I mean, with her parents, my grandparents, you know. So we all lived in the house and together. So my mother was in the shadow of my grandmother, you know, who was a big force in my life as a kid. But my mother knew I had this interest in the arts, you know. I like to paint and draw. And so she would always set aside a little money for me at the end of every month because I used to order these art books. And she was a waitress, and she really didn't have the money, but she would find some way to get that money to put on my dresser in my bedroom so I could order my art books, you know. And so that gave me a love of the arts.
And then we have to wind down so you can sign some books.
Okay.
But one of the last questions to bring it full circle is, would you comment on the movie about Mr. Allen and the articles about that, and the movie The Help, and compare those portrayals of that class of African Americans at that time?
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, there's not a lot I can say about the movie now because, you know, there's a whole PR machine around the movie, you know, and they do most of the speaking for it. But I will say this, The Help was fiction, and The Butler, the story of Mr. Allen, is a real-life, true story. And I just think that the sweep of history from, I mean, he went to the White House when Harry Truman was the president, and he left the White House when Ronald Reagan was in office, and he lived to see Barack Obama and take the oath of office. And so that sweep of history is really quite amazing. I escorted the butler to the swearing in. Me, him, and his son went. He was 89 then and very fragile, and you had to walk from the train station. You had to walk about 1.5 miles, and he said, "I'm going to do it. I want to do it. I got to do it." And we held him by the arms. I was on one side of him, and his son was on the other side. And he sat there and watched Obama and take the oath of office. And I looked over at him, and tears were coming down his eyes. And so you can just imagine, I mean, he stayed at the White House when the Black Power movement erupted, and there were people who were not happy that blacks still had these subservient jobs. You know, he walked through the riots when the riots hit because he wanted to get to the White House, you know, to be there and to go to work. Never missed a day of work. He had so much pride, and it's just really an astonishing story. I mean, it's just an astonishing story. Far bigger than me, but, you know, I happen to be the person who wrote it, you know, and I'm quite happy about that. But, you know, it's just, you know, it's American history is what it is.
Yeah, we're very glad you did, and thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.